So how do we actually know that this climate change is occurring? And these are some of the things that we've been observing. This is what we've been keeping track of. We're going to go through all of these in a bit more detail. So the first thing with this glacial retreat, we're just talking about how much a lot of these glaciers have melted, and we've lost a lot. This picture is pretty dramatic here. This is the same area, same spot. This was all covered in ice. Now it's kind of more like a big lake. It's been a lake long enough that there's been vegetation that has actually sprung up on top of these rocks here. This is from a glacier in Alaska. These two are also from glaciers in Alaska. You see, just 100 years went by and we're seeing a huge difference. I mean, these are glaciers that were there for thousands of years and they hadn't moved. And now they're just almost all gone. There's another place in Montana called Glacier National Park. They had about 150 glaciers and they're down to about 25 now. That area has seen some really drastic change in the last 60 years. The other thing we're observing, if you're talking about ice, is the polar ice cap at the Antarctic. These pictures here are pictures that NASA have kept track of. See, 1984 to 2016, so just 30 years, and there's been quite a difference in the size. We're almost half the size that it was back then. What makes it really difficult is that once these poles and once these glaciers start melting, then you kind of expose these darker waters underneath. And while the ice is white, it actually reflects that sunlight going back. So it does help to kind of keep us cooler. It provides sort of that air conditioning effect. However, as the global temperatures have risen, and we saw that especially around the poles and in those glacial areas, the temperature was raising a bit more than other areas. That area gets warmed up, the ice starts to melt, you start getting cracks in there. When you expose that dark water kind of absorbs even more sunlight, which traps even more heat, and that cycle just keeps going on and on like it is a big melting chain reaction. As a result, we have actually measured some sea level rising going on, especially in the last 30 years. It's been a little bit more dramatic than before. I mean, it's not enough that we're going to lose New York anytime soon, but they're predicting by 2100, if we don't stop this, if the glaciers and the poles, if they're completely gone, yeah, we're going to lose the coastline. In fact, most of Florida would actually be underwater. It probably is actually going to fill in a lot more of the Gulf area here. We're not quite going to be oceanfront property, but it'd be pretty close. When you're near pod, you're going to see this quiz popping up, so you're going to take those questions as some review on this. Then we're going to get into the next part, which has to deal with the ocean. So along with the ocean warming, that has a huge effect on these coral reef systems, because inside the coral reefs there's a symbiotic relationship between that and what's called a zooflagellate. And those little organisms living in the coral, they get a home and they produce food for the coral through photosynthesis. So it works really well. The only problem is that those little organisms are very picky about their temperatures. So even just a minor difference, like if it stays 2 degrees warmer for long enough, they just skip house and they want to be somewhere cooler. And that's what's leading to this coral bleaching, because once they leave, the coral just dies. It can't make food on its own. The coral dies, you lose the rest of the thing that was depending on that coral. And once you lose these corals, they don't come back.